Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we turn evidence-based research into the kind of knowledge you can actually use tomorrow.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are tackling, well, a really critical area for anyone working in education or, frankly, with young people.
Absolutely.
Behavior. Yeah, navigating the complex, often really stressful landscape of classroom behavior management.
It can feel overwhelming.
Totally. And if you feel like your default setting is just reactive, spending all your energy putting out fires.
It's just exhausting.
Right. Then this deep dive into positive behavior support, or PBS, this is basically your blueprint for turning that whole thing around.
That's exactly right. Our mission today is to really explore positive behavior support, PBS.
Okay.
This is a pretty comprehensive, evidence-based system, and it's designed to fundamentally shift the focus in education.
Shift it how?
Well, we're moving away from just, documenting and punishing undesirable actions.
The old way.
Kind of, yeah. And moving toward truly understanding the function, the why behind challenging behaviors.
And that core philosophical shift, I think that's where the power lies, isn't it?
It really is.
The fundamental assumption PBS operates under is that you just cannot effectively address a problem behavior unless you understand its underlying cause.
Exactly. If you don't know the root, any intervention is just, well, a shot in the dark.
And it often makes things worse, right?
It absolutely can. It's really the difference between treating the symptom versus finding the cure.
Yeah.
Precisely. And this leads right to the core principle that guides all PBS efforts.
Which is?
Successful, sustained intervention often requires modification to the student's educational environment.
The environment, not just the kid.
Right. The environment, the surrounding systems, rather than an exclusive focus on just trying to change the student's behavior directly.
So things like the physical setup, the schedule,
Yeah.
the teacher's response.
All of it. The environment, the systems, the physical placement, and, critically, the adult response. All must be strategically aligned.
To foster the good stuff.
To foster and reinforce desirable behavior. PBS isn't just a list of rules.
No.
It's a commitment to creating an educational context where, ideally, all students can thrive.
Okay, let's unpack the architectural map of the system then. The three-tiered structure.
Right, the pyramid.
Yeah. Because when people think of behavior management, I think they often visualize that crisis moment, the big blow-up.
It's the reactive trap.
Exactly. But PBS is meant to be overwhelmingly proactive, right? Designed so that most problems are stopped before they even start.
That's the goal. Prevention first.
So how is this tiered structure actually engineered to guarantee that the system prioritizes prevention over just reacting?
Well, the structure is geared specifically to allocate resources efficiently. It makes sure the broadest proactive support hits the largest number of students first.
Makes sense. Put the effort where it affects the most people.
If you spend, say, 80% of your energy on that foundational prevention piece.
Tier 1.
Tier 1, yeah. Then you dramatically reduce the need for those really intensive interventions later on.
Okay, so Tier 1 is that universal foundation, the ultimate proactive measure.
Yes. Tier 1 consists of school-wide preventative measures. This tier is designed to support every single student and every staff member. No exceptions.
Universal.
It's all about creating a universally predictable and, importantly, positive environment.
So what does that look like practically?
It means expectations must be explicitly clear to everyone, students, staff.
And not vague stuff like be respectful.
Exactly. Not that. Specific, observable actions like keep hands and feet to yourself in the hallway or use quiet voices during library time.
Things you can actually see and teach.
And practice. It also requires establishing a consistent system of positive reinforcements for the behavior you want to see.
Okay.
And ensuring absolute consistency in how minor, undesirable behavior is handled.
That consistency piece sounds key.
It's huge. If Tier 1 is robustly and consistently implemented, the sources suggest that around 80% of the student population.
The vast majority.
Yeah, they'll experience success and probably won't require any further, more targeted support.
That makes sense. Clear expectations, consistent reinforcement, predictable consequences that covers most kids.
It should.
But what happens when that foundational 80% net, well, isn't quite enough for certain students?
Yeah.
That's where we move into Tier 2, right?
Right. Tier 2 is where we implement targeted support.
Targeted, okay.
This tier is designed for students who haven't responded sufficiently to those general school-wide measures.
So maybe they're having recurring issues, a few office referrals.
Exactly. Perhaps they're demonstrating recurring issues, maybe, like you said, 2 or 3 referrals a month, something like that.
Yeah.
But the behavior isn't yet severe enough to be constantly disrupting the entire learning environment.
Okay. And what does targeted support actually look like here in Tier 2? We aren't talking about a full FBA and BIP yet, are we?
No, not yet. Correct. Tier 2 interventions are definitely more specialized than Tier 1.
A step up.
A step up, yeah. But they're still relatively low intensity and often delivered in small groups, not one-on-one usually.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Things like short, focused mentoring programs, small group social skills training that specifically targets identified deficits.
Like maybe turn-taking or handling disappointment?
Precisely. Or even things like friendship clubs designed to teach students how to initiate and maintain peer relationships appropriately.
Practical skills.
Very practical. Or we might introduce something like a simple generalized check-in, check-out behavior card system. The intensity of the intervention is increased, but the individualization is still somewhat standardized.
I see. So the purpose of Tier 2 is basically to catch those, let's say, moderate issues before they become severe. It's like a crucial intermediate bridge.
Exactly. The primary goal here is prevention of escalation. That's key.
Stop it before it gets worse.
We want to provide that necessary boost of support to avoid major disciplinary action down the line. Things like suspension or expulsion.
Which often don't solve the underlying problem anyway.
Right. It's a vital early warning and intervention system. It keeps those students included and connected to the overall school community.
Okay. And finally, when behaviors are most severe, persistent, really challenging the safety or the educational environment for extended periods, that leads us to Tier 3.
Right. Tier 3 is the most intensive, individualized level of intervention.
Yeah.
This tier is reserved for that small percentage of students, typically maybe 1 to 5%.
A small group, but high need.
Very high need. Their behaviors are the most challenging. Now, for students with disabilities, this level of support almost always requires that extensive investigative process.
The FBA.
The functional behavior assessment, yeah. And the development of a formal, highly customized behavior intervention plan, or BIP, that's typically overseen by the IEP team.
And Tier 3 is necessary because these behaviors are really impacting learning.
They pose the greatest threat to the student's ability to learn and participate meaningfully, and often the learning of others, too.
Okay, let's pull back a bit and focus on the daily stuff, the foundational practices. Because if we execute Tier 1 and maybe Tier 2 really successfully.
You minimize the need for Tier 3.
Exactly. Yeah. Which saves resources, time, stress. So what are the foundational tools teachers can use every single day to stop problems before they even start?
Well, we have to remember that a structured, positive environment is itself an intervention. It really is.
Okay.
And it starts with 2 critical components, clarity and structure. We can never, ever assume students inherently understand our expectations.
Right. We have to teach them. And that means expectations must be concrete. So instead of just saying, work quietly.
You need to define quietly.
Yeah. Specify. Noise levels should not exceed a whisper, and you should only be talking about the assignment. Something tangible.
Precisely. And that requires communicating rules clearly right from day one, providing demonstrations.
Showing them what it looks like.
Showing them what we sometimes call student rehearsal, so students can physically practice the desired behavior.
Like lining up quietly. Practice it.
Practice it. And ensuring routines are consistent. If students are unsure of what they should be doing at any given moment, that vacuum
Will get filled.
it will be filled, often with problem behavior.
And this brings us back to that cautionary tale we saw in the sources about consistency and routines, that example of Mrs. Smith.
Ah, yes, Mrs. Smith. She was struggling with the transition to recess, wasn't she?
Yeah, it was chaos. Kids shoving, one student, Mark, having a tantrum.
Right. And her failure wasn't necessarily in how she handled the tantrum in that specific moment.
No. What was it then?
Her critical failure was the lack of an established, consistent routine for that transition before it became a problem.
The preventative piece was missing.
Totally missing. I mean, if you look at effective classroom management literature, by November, routines for transition should be almost automatic for students. They should just know what to do.
Because they've been taught and practiced.
Exactly. The teacher needs to come to class fully prepared, minimize that transition time, have very clear expectations during the change. If you spend 5 minutes explicitly teaching a smooth transition now,
You save yourself hours later.
you save hours of disruption later. It's an investment.
That sounds deceptively simple, though. I imagine where teachers often stumble is maintaining that consistency, across different times of day, or maybe when they're having a bad day themselves.
Oh, consistency is the hardest part of Tier 1. Absolutely. It takes constant effort.
So what else helps?
Well, that's why another critical preventative strategy is maintaining a positive climate.
Okay, positive climate. What does that mean?
We need to actively shift the focus from punishment, from catching kids doing wrong,
To catching them doing right.
to recognition, yeah.
Hmm.
Instead of having a classroom culture that encourages tattling, for instance.
Which can get really negative.
It can. We encourage students to recognize peers who are engaging in positive, expected behaviors. Hey, I noticed Sarah shared her crayons really well.
I like that, making positive behavior visible and valued.
And that visibility feeds directly into the incentive system. This is crucial. We must use positive reinforcement as the typical incentive,
Not threats.
not relying on threats of punishment. If you use, say, a token or a point system, the points should be given for good behavior. It's an additive process. You earn points.
Okay.
If you start deducting points for misbehavior,
Which happens a lot.
it does. But you're fundamentally relying on negative punishment then, which shifts the entire classroom atmosphere away from prevention and positive striving and more towards compliance and avoidance.
Got it. Okay, let's get into the hard science that underlie these incentives. Modeling and reinforcement. This explains how students actually acquire new behaviors, right?
Exactly. Modeling, or sometimes called observational learning, happens through imitation,
Watching others.
watching others. Modeling is the demonstration. Now, there's explicit modeling.
Where the teacher says, watch me.
Right. Watch me carefully, and then performs the expected action, like demonstrating how to correctly respond when you disagree with a peer's idea.
Okay.
But what's often even more powerful is implicit modeling.
How so?
Well, think about it. If a teacher expresses disagreement with a student's maybe poorly formed idea, but does it in a positive and tactful manner,
Respectfully.
respectfully, students internalize that polite tone, that respectful approach.
Right.
They are learning a critical social skill just by watching how the adults in their environment handle minor conflicts and disagreements. It sinks in.
So modeling sets the stage, kind of shows the what. But the sources are really clear. Teachers must actively reinforce the behavior for it to actually stick.
Absolutely. Modeling alone often isn't enough.
Let's define the foundation again. Reinforcement. What is it technically?
Okay, so reinforcement dictates the likelihood of a behavior continuing to occur, plain and simple.
Okay.
And that likelihood is influenced entirely by the outcome, or what we call the reinforcer. It's a natural principle, really. Like the positive outcome of sweet grapes reinforces the behavior of eating them, right? You like it, you eat more grapes.
Makes sense.
The pain from touching a hot stove is a punishing outcome that makes the behavior of touching the stove less likely. Hopefully.
Right. So behavior is always communicating something about the outcomes it produces.
Always. It's seeking something or avoiding something based on past consequences.
Okay, let's tackle the two big concepts here that often confuse people. Positive and negative reinforcement. Starting with positive reinforcement.
Okay. Positive reinforcement occurs when a behavior is followed by a desirable outcome.
Something the student wants.
Something the student wants, yes. And that desirable outcome makes the behavior more likely to occur again. The key word is added. We are adding something good.
Like what?
Could be praise for neat work, earning a special privilege, like getting to sit at the teacher's desk for 10 minutes, or sending a positive note home that results in parental recognition and praise.
Things the student values.
Exactly. And you mentioned earlier the conditions for success are kind of nuanced. It's not just throwing stickers around.
Right. A sticker isn't always reinforcing for every kid.
It's vital to remember that. First, the reinforcer must be perceived as positive by the student. It's subjective.
So my reward might be your punishment.
Precisely. Like, the opportunity to read an extra book might be highly valued by one student. But if another student hates reading, that same opportunity becomes a punishment, right? It's aversive.
Okay, so know your student. What else?
Second, the reinforcement must be specific. Don't just say, good job.
Why not? Good job. Sounds good.
It's too vague. The student might not know what they did well. Say, I am really impressed with how you use specific details from the text in your answer. Or, wow, I like how neat your writing is this time.
Connecting it directly to the action.
Specificity links the reward directly to the target behavior. It ensures the student knows precisely what action they should repeat to get that positive outcome again.
That perfectly explains that example with Sally we read about. She sometimes touches classmates inappropriately.
Right.
So the teacher targets the desired replacement behavior, keeping hands to herself, and offers a gold star, which Sally values.
And Sally likes gold stars.
Exactly. So the star, the desirable outcome, serves as a positive reinforcer to increase the desired behavior of keeping her hands to herself.
Precisely. Textbook positive reinforcement. Now let's move to negative reinforcement.
Okay, this is the one that trips people up.
It really does, because the word negative makes everyone think punishment, but it is the opposite. It increases the likelihood of a behavior occurring.
Okay, wait. Increases. How does that work?
Negative reinforcement occurs when a behavior is followed by the removal of an undesirable outcome. Something bad stops.
Okay.
The behavior is increased because the student successfully escapes or avoids something negative or aversive in their environment.
So the behavior makes something unpleasant go away.
Exactly. The behavior is reinforced because a negative stimulus is subtracted or removed.
Okay, the classic example is the seatbelt buzzer in the car.
Right. Perfect example. You buckle up. That's the behavior.
To make the annoying sound stop.
To remove the annoying sound, that's the negative stimulus. That removal makes buckling up more likely in the future because it successfully stopped the unpleasant noise.
Got it. So how does that apply in a classroom?
Okay, let's say a teacher points out that a student's handwriting is sloppy, and the student finds this public comment embarrassing. That's the undesirable outcome.
Okay, the embarrassment.
Right. The student then begins doing neat work consistently in the future. Why?
To avoid the teacher calling them out again.
Exactly. To avoid the teacher's negative comment, to avoid that feeling of embarrassment, the behavior neat handwriting is reinforced by the removal of the anticipated negative comment.
Wow, okay. This sounds tricky to manage, though, because the student has to perceive the removed outcome as truly negative, right?
Yeah, they absolutely do. That's a critical condition. If a student actually enjoys adult attention, regardless of whether it's positive or negative.
Some kids do.
Some kids do. Then a teacher's disapproving frown or comment will not function as a negative reinforcer. It might even be positive reinforcement for them.
Whoa. Okay.
Furthermore, the student needs to clearly understand why that aversive thing was removed or avoided. This is often where a brief verbal explanation can really help. See? When you do neat work, I don't have to remind you.
Okay. Let's break down that really critical example we saw in the sources, the one involving a student complaining about an assignment. This gets into some complex reinforcement stuff.
Yeah, that's a great one because it shows how behavior serves a function.
So a student complains or argues consistently, hoping this behavior will lead to them being disciplined, maybe sent out of the room.
And the result.
They get to avoid completing the assignment they don't want to do.
Right. So in this scenario, the student's behavior, the complaining and arguing, is being negatively reinforced
Wow.
by the consequence. Successfully avoiding the assignment, the function of the behavior is escape.
Okay, so if we use that ABC structure antecedent behavior consequence.
Good framework.
The antecedent is the teacher presenting the difficult assignment. The behavior is the student complaining and arguing. The consequence is the removal or avoidance of having to do the assignment.
Exactly. And that removal of the assignment is the negative reinforcer. It strengthens the complaining behavior because it worked. It achieved the goal of escape.
Spot on. Okay, so the intervention cannot be simply punishing the complaining.
Why not?
Because if the student still gets out of the assignment, even if they get detention for complaining, the reinforcement loop for escaping the work is still maintained. Complaining still equals no assignment.
You nailed it. So the intervention strategy here must be to make it crystal clear to the student that while the complaining will result in a consequence, maybe discipline.
There's still a price for the complaining.
Yes, but crucially, he must still complete the assignment. Maybe later, maybe in detention, but it has to be done.
Ah, so you break the link.
You break the reinforcement contingency by ensuring that the problem behavior, complaining, no longer removes the prospect of doing the assignment. You immediately remove the negative reinforcer for that behavior.
That's actually a really sophisticated intervention. It shifts the entire function. The student realizes, okay, arguing isn't getting me out of the work anymore.
Exactly. The arguing no longer serves its original purpose of escape. It might lead to other negative consequences, making it less appealing overall.
Wow, okay. That leads directly then to punishment.
Yes. Punishment is distinct from negative reinforcement.
How so?
Because punishment always aims to make a behavior less likely to occur in the future. Punishment decreases behavior. Reinforcement, both positive and negative, increases behavior.
Got it. Decrease versus increase. And crucially, you said in the PBS philosophy, punishment is.
It is not intended to be a major element in the system. It's used sparingly, if at all, and usually only after reinforcement strategies haven't worked.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we should still understand the types. We break punishment down into two categories as well. positive and negative punishment.
Right. Positive punishment involves the introduction or adding of an undesirable outcome, adding something aversive.
Like what?
This could be requiring the student to complete an extra assignment they don't want to do, or having them stay after class to clean up a mess they made. You add an unpleasant task.
Okay. And negative punishment.
Negative punishment, often called response cost, involves the loss or removal of a desirable outcome or privilege, subtracting something good.
So losing recess time?
Losing recess privileges, yeah. Losing points in a class economy system. Having a fun activity delayed or canceled because of misbehavior.
Okay. But again, the emphasis in PBS is away from these.
Strongly away. While they do decrease behavior, their use is minimized in PBS because they don't actually teach the student what they should be doing instead. They focus on the don't instead of do.
Right. Okay, so let's circle back. Once we've established that proactive environment, that Tier 1 foundation, and we're reinforcing desired behaviors, what if a minor problem still pops up?
It will happen.
Then we rely on a hierarchy of responses designed to be minimally disruptive. This is the reactive strategies hierarchy.
Right. The principle here is simple. Always select the minimal response necessary to prevent the behavior from recurring or spreading.
Minimal response, why?
Because you want to maintain that positive classroom atmosphere. You want to stop the misbehavior without stopping the learning for everyone else, if possible. Keep the interruption as small as possible.
Okay, so the absolute softest approach is step 1, simple ignoring.
Yes, but strategically. We only use this for minor, one-time misbehaviors that aren't disruptive to others and don't seem likely to spread.
Like a brief sigh, or a single instance of talking out of turn quietly.
Exactly, something small. If the behavior is self-correcting, doesn't impact others, and isn't becoming a pattern, ignore it. And maybe even better, immediately reinforce the positive behavior of the students sitting near the one who sighed. I love how quietly Table 2 is working.
Okay, but what if ignoring doesn't work, or the behavior is slightly more disruptive?
If ignoring isn't appropriate or effective, the next step up is highly nonverbal communication, nonverbal cues.
Like a look.
Exactly, the look. This is a powerful, minimal intervention. It includes looking directly at the student, maybe a slight frown, or simply increasing your physical proximity, just moving closer to the student's desk.
Casually walking over.
Casually walking over. This can often resolve the issue without a single word being spoken, which is great because it prevents the flow of instruction from being broken for the whole class.
Okay, nonverbal first. And if proximity or the look doesn't work?
Then we move into the first verbal stage, but we still try to keep it general, not call the student out directly if possible. Brief, non-identifying verbal cues.
Give me an example.
Something like, we should all have our eyes on the board now, or let's make sure we're all focused on the task. You address the whole class, but the student exhibiting the problem behavior receives the message loud and clear.
Okay, keep it general first. What's next if that doesn't do it?
Next up, if they still haven't responded, well, now you probably have to direct the intervention specifically to them, but still keep it brief and quiet. Brief verbal cues directed specifically at the student.
So using their name.
Using the student's name, maybe in a neutral, quiet tone, or just a quiet two-word request to cease the behavior, like, Sarah, quiet voice, please, or John, eyes forward. Keep it short and low-key.
Okay, and finally, the last resort, which sounds like it signals a more significant problem because it interrupts everybody.
Right, this is explicitly addressing the behavior. This means you actually have to interrupt regular activities to address the behavior directly, and maybe reinforce the rule or expectation.
So stopping the lesson.
Potentially stopping the lesson briefly. If the student doesn't respond to those 4 preceding, less intrusive cues, the teacher may need to stop, address the student privately for a moment, or redirect them to a specific location for instruction correction or a cool down.
Okay, that feels like a big step.
It is. And honestly, if you find yourself relying on that final step often, that's a really clear signal.
That signal of what?
That your Tier 1 systems, or maybe your use of positive reinforcement strategies elsewhere in the classroom, needs a serious review. You shouldn't be getting to step 5 frequently in a well-managed, proactive classroom. Okay, so now we need to shift gears a bit. We move to situations where the behavior is no longer minor or easily corrected with just a simple cue or ignoring it.
Right, things are escalating.
Exactly. When problem behavior becomes chronic or severe, that's when the legal and ethical framework supporting students with disabilities really kicks in, particularly under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
Okay, let's look at the legal and ethical basis here. You mentioned historically, schools may be over-relied on punitive measures,
Yeah, definitely. Suspension, expulsion, those were often the go-to tools.
but that raised concerns.
Major ethical concerns. About effectiveness, did suspension actually teach anything? About fairness, especially for students whose behavior might be linked to a disability, and about the impact of isolating students, particularly those with disabilities.
So IDEA changed things.
IDEA fundamentally changed the game in this regard. It mandates the use of positive behavior support. The law requires that IEP teams consider positive behavioral strategies and supports whenever a student's behavior interferes with their learning or the learning of others.
So it's not just a good idea, it's often a legal requirement for students with IEPs.
It absolutely is. The goal is to reduce problem behaviors, minimize punishment, and support inclusion, not exclusion.
Okay. And the ultimate safeguard against, let's say, inappropriate punishment for students with disabilities is that process called the Manifestation Determination Review, or MDR. When exactly does that become mandatory?
Right, the MDR. That process is triggered when a student with a disability is removed from their current educational placement for more than 10 school days within a single school year.
And that could be 10 days in a row
Yeah,
or adding up over time.
correct. More than 10 cumulative or consecutive school days due to recurring or extreme misbehavior. When that happens, the IEP team must convene quickly.
And what are they deciding?
They have to answer two critical questions. First, was the misbehavior that led to the removal a direct manifestation, basically a symptom of the student's disability?
Okay. Question 1. Is it part of the disability?
Right. And question 2, did the misbehavior result from the school's failure to appropriately implement the student's existing IEP? Maybe the supports weren't being provided as written.
Okay. So let's take an example. A student with, say, an emotional disturbance classification commits an act of physical aggression that would normally get any student a 12-day suspension.
Okay. That's over the 10-day limit.
Right. So the MDR must happen before that long-term removal can proceed.
Yes. And if the team determines the behavior is related to the disability, let's say the aggression is a known manifestation of their emotional disturbance.
Then what? Can they still be suspended for 12 days?
No. Then a functional behavior assessment, an FBA, must be conducted immediately. Or if one already exists, it has to be reviewed and probably revised.
And why?
To develop and update a behavior intervention plan, a BIP. The idea is you cannot punish a behavior that is fundamentally a symptom of the disability. You have to teach an alternative skill, provide support.
Okay. But what if the team decides the behavior is not related to the disability?
Good question. If they determine it's not related, for example, maybe the student brings a weapon to school and the team carefully reviews all the data and agrees this specific action was a choice unrelated to their identified disability.
Yeah.
Then the student can be disciplined in the same manner and duration as their non-disabled peers would be for the same offense. Though, even in that case, conducting an FBA might still be considered appropriate practice to understand the behavior better.
I see. Okay, this moves us logically into the engine of advanced PBS. The Functional Behavior Assessment, or FBA. This is the process for figuring out that function what we talked about earlier.
Exactly. The FBA is the scientific investigation part. Its ultimate purpose is to determine what causes the problem behavior, what sustains it, what keeps it going, and based on that, figure out what effective interventions will actually look like.
And it's built on that assumption that all behavior has a purpose.
It's built on the absolutely critical assumption that every behavior, no matter how disruptive or bizarre it might seem, serves a specific purpose for that individual. It's meeting some need.
I found that example you mentioned earlier, the two students who talk back, really illuminating here.
Yeah, it highlights the importance of function over just the form of the behavior.
So you have two students, both frequently talk back to the teacher.
Yeah.
The observable behavior looks identical.
Right, talking back.
But student A talks back because they are seeking peer approval, and maybe their classmates laugh or give them attention when they do it.
Okay, function is peer attention.
While student B talks back because they deeply resent authority figures and feel a sense of internal control or power when they defy the teacher.
Okay, function is control or escaping demands from authority.
Same behavior, talking back. But completely different functions.
which means they will require completely different intervention strategies. Punishing both might stop the talking back temporarily, but it won't address the underlying need for attention for student A or the resentment for student B.
So the FBA process itself has to be really systematic to capture these kinds of differences. It starts, you said, with a rigorous description.
Yes. The description of the target behavior must be concrete, specific, and purely observational. You are documenting only what you see and hear.
No judgments, no interpretations.
Avoid vague judgments, hypotheses, or predictions entirely at this stage. So instead of writing, Juan is an angry young man who disrupts class, which is a judgment and an interpretation, you must write something like, Juan talks back to the teacher during one-on-one interactions initiated by the teacher approximately 3 times per instructional period. See the difference. Specific, observable, measurable.
Got it. Specificity prevents misdiagnosis right from the start.
Absolutely.
Okay, once we define the behavior precisely, we gather context. This is where we look for the patterns.
Exactly. Context means gathering information about the setting, the time of day, and especially the antecedents, what happens immediately before the behavior occurs, and the consequences, what happens immediately after.
ABC.
The ABC model, yeah. We need to know, does the talking back only happen in math class? Does it only occur when certain peers are present? If so, how do those peers react? Does the teacher's tone of voice or physical proximity seem to trigger it?
So this means observing the student in different places at different times.
It requires observation in different contexts, definitely. And it often involves interviews with the student, parents, teachers, anyone who interacts with the student regularly to get a full picture of those antecedents and consequences.
Okay, description, context. Then, after collecting all that data, we generate the cause hypothesis, basically, our informed guesses about the function.
Right. Based on the patterns we see in the data, we start generating hypotheses about the purpose. Is the behavior serving to get something? Like attention, peer or adult, access to a preferred item or activity?
Or is it to escape something?
Or is it escape or avoidance? Escape from a difficult task, escape from social interaction, escape from unpleasant sensory input? Or maybe it's related to sensory needs seeking stimulation or avoiding it. Or maybe it expresses anger, frustration, or lack of knowledge.
So we're trying to nail down the purpose.
We're looking for the most likely purpose, yes. And the intervention we choose hinges entirely on which of those purposes the behavior seems to be serving.
And this leads to that absolutely crucial distinction you mentioned, the real litmus test for picking the right intervention. Skill deficit versus performance deficit. Can you break that down again?
Yeah, this is so critical for intervention planning and often where things go wrong. A student who genuinely does not know how to perform the desired behavior, maybe they lack the necessary social skills or academic knowledge or self-regulation techniques, they have a skill deficit.
They literally can't do it.
They can't do it because they haven't learned how. They require direct instruction, modeling, teaching, practice, feedback.
Okay, that's skill deficit. What's performance deficit?
Conversely, a student who knows how to behave appropriately, they understand the rules, they can perform the skill in some situations, but they choose not to, or maybe they're unable to execute that knowledge consistently due to intense emotion, anxiety, fatigue, frustration, lack of motivation. They have a performance deficit.
So they can do it, but they won't or don't in that moment.
Exactly. They don't need more instruction on the skill itself. They need motivation, reinforcement for using the skill, or maybe strategies to manage the emotions or conditions that are getting in the way of them performing the skill they already possess, like relaxation techniques or self-monitoring strategies.
But how does a teacher or an FBA team reliably tell the difference? I mean, how do we definitively separate can't from won't in the real-time chaos of a classroom? That seems really hard.
It is challenging, and it's why the A and C data in the FBA are so important. What are the triggers? What are the payoffs? But maybe the simplest, most reliable test involves some form of structured assessment or role-playing.
Right.
If you ask a student to demonstrate the desired behavior, say appropriately asking for help instead of yelling out in a calm, low-stress, one-on-one setting, maybe with prompts, and they can do it fairly easily,
Then it's probably performance.
that strongly suggests a performance deficit. The problem isn't lack of knowledge, it's about executing that skill under specific, more challenging triggering conditions. If, however, they struggle with the demonstration even when they're calm and you're helping them,
Skill deficit.
that points more towards a true skill deficit requiring explicit teaching. The FBA team really needs to gather data observation, interviews, maybe some direct assessment of the skill to support one hypothesis over the other. You can't just guess.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Tested directly if possible. And the final component, then, of the FBA is determining the intervention replacement behavior.
Right. Based on everything you've learned, the description, context, function, and whether it's skill or performance, you design interventions. And these must be directly related to the hypothesized cause or function.
So if the behavior's function is getting peer attention,
Then the intervention must teach a replacement behavior that serves the exact same function, getting peer attention, but in an appropriate way.
like teaching them how to join a game politely instead of disrupting it.
Exactly. Or teaching effective, non-disruptive strategies for gaining peer approval or initiating conversation. The key insight is, we aim to change the method the student uses to meet their need, not necessarily the underlying need or purpose itself. We give them a better way to get what they're seeking.
Okay. And all this FBA data, all these hypotheses and plans, they get formalized into the behavior intervention plan, or BIP.
Correct. The BIP is the written blueprint. It's typically developed by the full IEP team using all that rich FBA data, and it focuses entirely on fostering those positive replacement behaviors and managing the environment to support them.
And IDA, the law, actually mandates several specific things that must be included in a BIP, right?
Yes, there are required elements. These include clearly identifying the targeted problem behavior using that specific FBA description,
Okay.
detailing the types, and importantly, the effectiveness or lack thereof of previous interventions that were tried.
What worked, what didn't.
Right. Outlining the specific planned interventions. What exactly are we going to do? Setting specific measurable goals. How will we know if it's working?
Data, again.
Always data. Defining the approach to evaluating the BIP's effectiveness and setting a schedule for reviewing the plan. Providing a clear strategy for parent communication and involvement. And, critically, including a crisis support plan for emergencies if the behavior poses safety risks.
It's interesting that the law says you have to document previous interventions, but listing all possible suitable interventions isn't required. The focus seems to be on the specific chosen path forward.
Absolutely. The BIP isn't a menu of options. It's a specific plan of action based on the FBA. And crafting a successful BIP requires careful planning for long-term success. Success really hinges on a few key conditions.
Like what?
First, the intervention must closely align with the hypothesized function from the FBA and the student's specific needs and strengths. Mismatch equals failure.
Match the function.
Match the function. Second, it should generally choose the least intrusive and least complex intervention possible that is still likely to be effective. We don't jump straight to the most intensive Tier 3 strategy if a simpler Tier 2 support might work. Start simple.
Makes sense. And third,
And this is often overlooked, the plan must have high acceptability to both the implementers, the teachers, the staff who have to carry it out daily.
it has to be feasible for them.
It has to be feasible and they have to buy into it. And perhaps most importantly, it needs to be acceptable to the student. If the student doesn't perceive the replacement behavior as being easier or more efficient or ultimately more rewarding than the problem behavior,
It won't do it.
they won't do it consistently. The BIP will likely fail no matter how well designed it looks on paper. The replacement behavior has to work for them.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to the sort of mechanics of implementation. Let's get practical. How do teachers and teams actually gather the evidence, the data that informs these complex FBAs and BIPs, and more importantly, proves whether the interventions are actually working over time?
Yeah, e-data collection is absolutely non-negotiable in PBS. It's essential.
Why so essential?
Because it's the only objective way to monitor behavior over time and measure whether those plan changes, those interventions in the BIP are actually making a difference. Without data, we're just operating on gut feeling anecdotes.
Which can be really biased.
Totally biased. Data keeps us honest and tells us if we need to adjust the plan.
Okay, so where do we start? The sources mentioned indirect assessment. What's that?
Indirect assessment is basically gathering information without directly observing the behavior as it happens.
Like how?
This typically involves things like structured interviews, talking with the student, their parents, current and past teachers, other staff who know them well. It also includes reviewing existing records, things like past disciplinary referrals, attendance reports, previous assessments, maybe old BIPs.
So you're getting background and different perspective.
Exactly. It gives us valuable historical context and multiple viewpoints. However, indirect assessment has limitations. It's inherently subjective, right? It relies on memory, perception.
And it's prone to observer bias.
Definitely. A teacher might say, oh, he's always disruptive. But the direct observation data might show it only happens during independent math time twice a week. Big difference.
Right.
Therefore, indirect data is useful for context, but it must always be supplemented by direct assessment.
Okay, direct assessment, which is actually watching the student. First-hand observation. What tools do we use for that? How do we make it objective?
Direct assessment needs to be methodical and objective. We use specific tools to quantify the behavior. Things like checklists, just tallying every time a targeted behavior occurs.
Okay.
Rating scales, maybe to measure the severity or intensity of an outburst on a scale of 1 to 5. Duration records using a stopwatch to time how long a behavior, like a tantrum or being off task, actually lasted.
Getting precise timing.
Exactly. And time sampling records this is where you observe the student at specific points in time, say at the end of every 10-minute interval, and just record whether the behavior was occurring at that exact moment.
Got it. So lots of ways to quantify. And the goal of all this?
The main goal is to establish a clear, objective baseline measure of the behavior's frequency, duration, or intensity before the BIP is implemented.
So you know where you started.
So you know exactly where you started. Then you continue collecting the same data after the intervention begins, so you can quantitatively measure the change and see if the BIP is working. Is the behavior decreasing? Is the replacement behavior increasing? The data tells the story.
Okay. So once we have the data, and let's say it identifies a true deficit, maybe a skill deficit, for example.
Right. The student doesn't know how.
Then we need specific behavior management strategies that are focused on teaching that replacement skill. Let's look at some of those specialized training programs mentioned.
Yeah, two really crucial instructional approaches often used in Tier 2 or Tier 3 are social skills training and anger management training.
Okay, social skills training first. What does that involve?
Social skills training needs to be highly targeted. It's not just about telling kids to be nice.
No.
No. It focuses on teaching specific, discrete interpersonal skills. Things like how to appropriately initiate friendships or join a group, how to communicate your needs clearly and assertively instead of whining or demanding, how to listen effectively to others, how to recognize the signs of conflict escalating, how to deal with frustration or losing a game gracefully, even how to handle bullying appropriately.
Wow, those are really concrete life skills.
Incredibly important skills that many students, especially those with certain disabilities or difficult backgrounds, may not have learned implicitly. They need to be taught explicitly.
Okay. And what about anger management training?
Anger management training is more about internal regulation. It focuses on helping students avoid triggers when possible, but also, critically, how to deal with feelings of anger when they inevitably arise, and how to resolve conflicts without aggression.
What kinds of strategies are taught?
It often involves teaching physical relaxation techniques, deep breathing, muscle relaxation, but maybe even more importantly, it emphasizes cognitive techniques, things like self-talk.
What's that?
Learning to monitor your own internal emotional responses, recognizing when you're starting to get angry, and then using pre-practice coping thoughts or statements to reframe the situation in a less threatening way. This helps diminish the likelihood of an explosive reaction. It's about changing your thinking to change your feeling and behavior.
Okay. So whether it's social skills or anger management, when you're teaching any complex replacement behavior, the forces emphasize there's a pretty strict instructional sequence that research shows is most effective. It's much more involved than just telling a student what to do.
Wow, absolutely. Just telling rarely works for complex skills. The effective sequence usually begins with task analysis or chaining.
Breaking it down.
Breaking it down. Complex behaviors like, say, entering the classroom quietly after recess and starting your work must be broken down into small, sequential, teachable components. Like, step 1, stop talking before you reach the classroom door. Step 2, walk directly to your assigned seat without touching others. Step 3, quietly remove your needed materials from your backpack. Step 4, look at the board for the do now instructions and begin. You break it into manageable steps.
Okay, that makes sense. Then what?
Then the teacher moves into description, followed by modeling. The teacher explains each step clearly, maybe points to a visual chart of the steps,
Shows them.
and then models the entire sequence correctly. acts it out. Then comes the crucial part. Student practice with feedback. The student tries it.
And what if they mess up? What if they only get part of it right? Say they walk quietly to their seat, but then forget to get their materials out and start talking.
That's where the teacher uses shaping.
Shaping. Okay, what's that exactly?
Shaping means you reinforce successive approximations of the behavior. You reinforce behaviors that get progressively closer and closer to the desired final behavior. You don't expect perfection right away.
So in that example,
If the student only achieves step 1 and 2 correctly, stops talking, walks to seat quietly, you might initially reinforce just that achievement. Great job walking quietly to your seat. Student name. That's exactly right.
even though they didn't do the whole thing?
Even though they didn't do the whole chain yet, you don't wait for perfection initially, especially if it's a difficult skill for them. Then you slowly raise the bar. Maybe next time you only provide that reinforcement if they complete steps 1, 2, and 3 correctly. You gradually shape their behavior towards the final goal until they eventually complete the entire chain successfully.
That sounds like it requires immense patience and probably a lot of time up front, especially when the student struggles.
It does. Shaping requires a high initial investment of time and positive attention, and that's honestly why teachers often skip it or rush it. But skipping it often leads to long-term failure because the student never truly masters the skill.
Okay, so shaping is key. What else is in the sequence?
As the student practices, the teacher uses prompts. These are cues or hints, maybe verbal reminders, what's next, or gestures, pointing to the backpack, to guide them towards the correct step.
Okay.
But you can't prompt forever. So those prompts are then systematically and gradually withdrawn through a process called fading,
Fading the prompts away.
until the student can perform the entire behavior independently without any hints. Fading is actually pretty tricky. It requires the teacher to systematically lessen the intensity or frequency of the cue until the student doesn't need it at all. For example, maybe moving from a full hand gesture cue to just a slight nod to eventually just making eye contact as a reminder.
Okay, building independence.
Yeah.
And the final critical step, you mentioned this, is where many interventions fail.
Yes. This is transfer or generalization.
Meaning?
Meaning supporting the student in using those newly learned behaviors effectively with different people and different places or settings, and maybe using different materials.
So it's not just performing for the one teacher who taught them.
Exactly. If the student can only be quiet and follow the routine for the math teacher who spent weeks teaching and reinforcing it, but falls apart in science class or music class,
The intervention hasn't really generalized.
it failed at generalization. We must actively program for generalization. Maybe by having other staff members explicitly use the same prompts and reinforcements in different contexts, or practicing the skill in the actual environments where it needs to occur. We have to ensure the behavior is contextually transferable and durable.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so beyond teaching entirely new skills, sometimes the most immediate changes can come from simply modifying the environment, right? Environmental modifications.
Absolutely. The environment includes the physical setting, the social setting, schedules, routines, and sometimes changing the setting is the least intrusive and quickest path to behavioral change.
And we can achieve this by strategically manipulating those reinforcers we talked about based on what the FBA told us about the function of the behavior.
Precisely. It all comes back to the FBA data.
Okay, so first strategy, removing a positive reinforcer that was maintaining the problem behavior.
Right. Let's say the FBA shows a student deliberately breaks their pencil multiple times a day. Why? Because they absolutely love the adult attention and the little bit of social interaction they get when they stand up, walk across the room, and use the noisy electric pencil sharpener. That trip is reinforcing the pencil breaking.
Okay, so how do you modify the environment?
The teacher changes the environment to remove that specific positive reinforcer. Maybe they limit sharpener access to only specific times, like before class starts, or maybe easier, they provide the student with their own manual desktop sharpener right at their seat.
Ah, so the pencil breaking behavior no longer yields that desired reward, the walk, the attention, the noise.
Exactly, you remove the payoff.
Okay, second environmental strategy, removing a negative reinforcer for the problem behavior.
This one's a bit trickier. Let's say the FBA indicates a student frequently shouts out negative comments about themselves or the task, "This is stupid, I can't do this," because they deeply fear seeming weak or incompetent when asked a difficult question. The shouting helps them escape that feeling or maybe even escape the task.
So the negative reinforcer is avoiding the feeling of incompetence. or the hard task itself.
Right. So the teacher modifies the environment to remove that negative reinforcer, the prospect of appearing weak or failing. How? Maybe by providing frequent, quiet, reassuring, non-threatening statements. It's okay if this is tricky, we can work through it. Or maybe by pre-teaching a strategy, like giving the student a discrete pass card they can use once per class to skip a question they feel unsure about, removing the intense pressure of immediate performance.
So the shouting behavior is no longer needed to escape that negative feeling of vulnerability or failure.
Hopefully not. You remove the need for the escape behavior by reducing the aversiveness of the situation.
Okay. Third, introducing a positive reinforcer for a desirable alternative behavior.
This is pairing environmental change with positive reinforcement. Say a student often slouches, doodles, and makes distracting noises during morning announcements. The FBA suggests the function is probably gaining attention. Maybe negative attention, but still attention.
Okay.
The teacher modifies the environment and contingencies by clearly telling the student beforehand. If you can sit quietly and look attentive during the entire announcement time today, you will earn the privilege of being my special helper to pass out materials for the next activity, something the student finds highly reinforcing.
So you make the alternative behavior the path to a desired outcome.
Precisely. You make sitting quietly more rewarding than distracting.
Okay, this brings us to the token economy, which sounds like a more formal system combining some of these ideas. It's often mentioned as a key Tier 2 or maybe Tier 3 strategy.
Yes, a token economy is a structured system. It's powerful because it pairs immediate positive reinforcement for desired behaviors with sometimes response cost, which is a form of negative punishment for problem behaviors.
How does the reinforcement part work?
The student earns tokens, these could be poker chips, points on a chart, Snickers, special classroom money for exhibiting specific predefined desirable behaviors, like completing work, participating appropriately, following rules.
Okay, they earn tokens, then what?
Then, these tokens can be exchanged later for highly desirable backup reinforcers. These are things the student really wants, maybe extra computer time, free reading time, lunch with the teacher, selection of a preferred classroom job, access to special games or activities.
So the tokens themselves aren't the reward, they're like currency.
Exactly. They bridge the gap between the behavior and the ultimate reward. The complexity lies in establishing a clear and fair exchange rate, how many tokens buys computer time, and ensuring the backup reinforcers remain highly motivating and accessible to the student.
Okay, and what about the response cost element you mentioned in a token economy? That's the negative punishment part.
Right. Response cost involves losing a previously earned token for engaging in a specific, predefined problem behavior. For instance, a student with autism who sometimes mimics the teacher might earn a token for making a meaningful, relevant response during a lesson.
That's the positive reinforcement.
Yes. But they might lose one of their earned tokens if they engage in direct mimicking.
Okay, but isn't that punishment which PBS tries to minimize?
It is a form of negative punishment, yes, and its ethical use demands careful consideration. The student must still have ample opportunity to earn tokens. The system should be heavily weighted towards earning, not losing. And the lost item, the token, isn't something essential like basic rights or needed support. The primary focus always remains on earning rewards for positive behavior, with response costs used sparingly and only for specific targeted behaviors if reinforcement alone isn't sufficient.
Okay, so earn more than you lose, basically.
Yeah.
We also touched on modifying teacher behavior and expectations as environmental changes.
Yes, critically important. The environment absolutely includes the social dynamic and the teacher's own actions. If FBA data, maybe from a student interview, reveals that a student feels threatened or becomes anxious when a particular teacher speaks in a certain loud or unpleasant tone, or stands too close when correcting them,
The teacher needs to adjust.
the teacher must be willing to modify their own proximity, tone of voice, or approach when interacting with that student. That's modifying the social environment to be less triggering and more supportive of positive behavior.
Or modifying the expectations themselves.
Sometimes, yes, modifying behavioral expectations might be necessary. For example, allowing a student with a diagnosed traumatic brain injury who gets easily agitated a pre-agreed upon self-calming strategy, like putting their head down on the desk for a few minutes or taking a quiet walk to a designated spot before they escalate. That prevents greater disruption later by adjusting the expectation for that student under specific conditions.
Okay. And lastly, simple physical placement in the room.
Placement can be paramount, yet it's often underestimated. Seating a student with autism who is easily overstimulated or provoked by unpredictable peer movements may be in the front row, but at the end of the row.
Why the end?
To minimize close proximity to other students on both sides whose potentially innocuous movements, like a foot tapping, a pencil rolling off a desk, might be perceived by the student with autism as a provocative antecedent, triggering a disruptive reaction.
So you engineer the physical space to reduce known triggers.
Exactly. These seemingly small environmental changes, seating, scheduling, teacher approach, how expectations are set, are often the most effective, least intrusive, and most sustainable interventions.
Wow. That was an immensely practical deep dive into positive behavior support. Feels like we covered a lot of ground.
We definitely did. It's a big topic.
So just to summarize the key takeaways, PBS, at its heart, is defined by its proactive, three-tiered approach, right? Universal prevention and teaching for everyone at Tier 1.
Building that strong foundation.
Then that targeted, often small group support at Tier 2 for students needing a bit more.
Catching problems early.
And finally, those intensive, highly individualized plans, usually involving an FBA and BIP at Tier 3 for the students with the most significant challenges.
That's the structure. And we established the critical legal role, especially under IDEA, of that functional behavior assessment, the FBA, particularly when severe behavior occurs and might be related to a disability.
Right. The FBA is really the scientific engine driving the whole advanced system.
It really is. It's rooted in the foundational science of behavior reinforcement, punishment, function. It commits us, forces us really, to understand the function, the purpose of behavior.
And making that crucial distinction between a skill deficit they don't know how and a performance deficit they know how but aren't doing it.
Exactly. Because that distinction tells us whether we need to teach or motivate, ensuring we are targeting the right thing in the right way.
So the ultimate goal, threading through everything, is always to move away from just reacting with punishment.
Which often doesn't work long term.
And move towards proactive teaching. Using those concrete strategies we talked about, like clear expectations, modeling, specific positive reinforcement, shaping complex skills, fading prompts, and strategically modifying the environment.
All designed to ensure that the positive replacement behaviors we want to see are actually easier, more efficient, and ultimately more rewarding for the student than the disruptive ones they were using before.
Making the right way the easy and better way for them.
That's the art and science of it. And, if we accept that core premise that all behavior serves a purpose, it's communicating a need.
Yeah.
Here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to carry forward from this. How might approaching your own daily frustrations, maybe in the classroom, maybe at home with your own kids, maybe even in your workplace interactions, how might approaching those frustrating behaviors by first pausing and genuinely asking yourself, okay, wait, what function might this behavior be serving for this person right now? How might that question fundamentally change your own initial response?
Instead of just reacting emotionally.
Instead of reacting emotionally or jumping to judgment, try applying that skill deficit versus performance deficit lens to the challenges you see around you. Ask, is this person struggling because they don't know how, or because something is getting in the way of them doing what they know? You might find that the path towards a more thoughtful, strategic, and ultimately more effective intervention, whether you're a teacher, a parent, or just a person interacting with other people, becomes much clearer when you stop just reacting to the surface behavior and start diagnosing the underlying function.
That's a fantastic challenge to end on. Thinking about the why changes everything.
It really can.
Thank you so much for walking us through that. That was incredibly insightful. And thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.